The Biden administration continues to pull troops out of Afghanistan in a large-scale withdrawal. The military will now conduct counterterrorism efforts outside of Afghanistan. Tom Joscelyn is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He's senior editor for the Long War Journal. Tom, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Can you give us kind of a high-level overview of the terror organizations that are currently on Afghan soil and who might go there now that the Taliban are in control?
Well, I think it's very important to keep in mind, as we've argued for many years now at the Long War Journal, the U.S. had really underestimated the degree of the alliance between the Taliban and al-Qaeda. So it's not really a matter of al-Qaeda making a comeback or a resurgence or a reconstitution in Afghanistan. These are sort of some of the buzzwords you hear from UK and American officials. But in fact, they've been there the whole time, and they've been fighting to resurrect the Taliban's Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So this is very much a victory for al-Qaeda in addition to the Taliban. In fact, we've documented how senior personnel all the way down between the two are intertwined. And so often that's the case, you can't even really tell them apart. So this is very much a victory for al-Qaeda. And there are various al-Qaeda affiliated groups in Afghanistan today. You know, just this morning I wrote up a report about how the Pakistani Taliban, which was responsible for the failed May 1st, 2010 car bombing in Times Square, New York, has just renewed its allegiance to the Afghan Taliban. They've been fighting to resurrect the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan for years as well. So there are many different components or pieces to the al-Qaeda web. You also have an ISIS group that still has a lingering presence in Afghanistan. This is going to be very difficult for the U.S. government to keep track of in the years to follow. I think it's going to be a counterterrorism challenge.
Well, Tom, let me ask you first, if the Taliban doesn't work to stop, these groups set on attacking Americans or American interests, let's just make that assumption that they won't try to stop them. How would that change how the U.S. approaches counterterrorism efforts in Afghanistan?
You know, I think that we should operate on that assumption. I think that the bottom line from my perspective is the U.S. had a hard time tracking what al-Qaeda and affiliated groups were doing in Afghanistan for all these years when it had a significant footprint in Afghanistan. Now with the withdrawal, President Biden trying to complete a withdrawal, I think it's going to be even more difficult without any boots on the ground and without any, we're going to see the withdrawal of the embassy, you're going to see withdrawal of all the personnel. It's going to be all those places that basically provided hubs for intelligence and other sort of professionals. They're all going away. So I think it's going to be very difficult for the U.S. to keep tabs on what's happening there. I think the bigger point from my perspective is that this is going to be a boon. It already is a boon for the global jihadist cause. The al-Qaeda groups that we track everywhere across Africa, across the Middle East and elsewhere are all signaling this today. They're all cheering this on and saying this is a victory for their cause and the reason why they have to keep fighting. We've tracked as well that each one of them poses some degree of counterterrorism threat to the West as well. So this is going to be an ongoing challenge.
So what do you see, Tom, now that there's not going to be an embassy, there's not going to be troops on the ground? How do you see reorganizing of intelligence and military operations?
Well, the U.S. is going to be heavily relying on signals intelligence. They're going to be relying on any spies who are left behind who can avoid the Taliban and al-Qaeda's wrath. They're going to have to come up with some clever ways to keep track of this. One of the things they can do and have been doing is monitoring travel, of course, people who are suspicious who are traveling to or from the region. That's a big way that red flags can be sent up. So the U.S. certainly has a number of tools at its disposal to keep track of the terrorists, operating in Afghanistan and flowing in and out of the country. The problem is that I think that this will probably open up some new windows of opportunity for the terrorists, given that the U.S. is withdrawing, because there were already blind spots in our understanding of this, big blind spots, I would argue, for many years while we were there. I think those blind spots only increase in size. So I think this is going to be an ongoing challenge. I don't think there's any U.S. counterterrorism professional you can talk to who's just sloughing us off at this point. I think everybody understands this is going to be a problem going forward.
You said that this is going to open up opportunities for the terrorists. What kind of opportunities?
Well, look, I mean, we've been tracking what al-Qaeda's been saying all along. In Urdu, for example, the Urdu literature earlier this year, they're talking about how al-Qaeda was defeating in this joint al-Qaeda-Taliban offensive, ISIS in eastern Afghanistan. And as they did that, the fighter who was interviewed in this Urdu magazine for al-Qaeda says, look, we're beating ISIS here, we're beating the Americans and NATO here, and we're going to topple the Afghan government. And after that happens, we're going to take the fight home to the Yankees. So, meaning us, the U.S. So, look, I think they're going to try something. They're going to try to attack us in different ways. They already have a capacity to do that on a small scale. It's a big open question about whether or not they have the capacity to do something bigger. It doesn't mean they'll be successful. Of course, there are a lot of tripwires they could still set off that would stop them. I always like to say, if you look back at the history of the 9/11 plot, for example, they got lucky in some ways. There were 3 or 4 major opportunities for that thing to be unraveled, and they just happened to get lucky, even at a time when the U.S. was relatively not prepared to really counter the terrorist threat. They still took some luck involved. So, look, this is not a guaranteed foregone conclusion that they're going to be successful. I do think, however, that the risk goes up significantly.
Tom, briefly, in the time that we've got left, military operations, are we going to be depending on airstrikes and Predator drones or armed drones? What are we looking at from the Pentagon's perspective?
From the Pentagon's perspective, they're going to be launching airstrikes from afar, from basically air bases throughout the Gulf and from other assets. One of the failures here was that there was no, as far as we know, there was no agreement put in place to base a drone sort of operation anywhere around Afghanistan as the withdrawal was occurring. And Pakistan has been very loudly saying they're not going to host the Americans. So it remains to be seen if they can find something that's nearer at hand.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there's a lot more to say on this subject, but we'll continue to watch it on this program. Thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you.